Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita with Future Pastimes, and this is Battle Language, where we have a roundtable discussion on a topic. And today we're going to be talking about Arrakis, which is another Future Pastimes game that is set in the Dune universe, although it's set many, many generations before the events of the book Dune, and of course the movies as well. And it's all about the Fremen tribes struggling and fighting against each other and against the harsh conditions of Arrakis in order to build sieges and ultimately lead the biggest tribe. So we have a special guest with us today, is another Future Pastimes member, one of the designers of Arrakis and one of the original designers of Borderlands, which we're also going to talk about, and that's Bill Eberle. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. Should be
And
fun.
we've got some of our regulars. We have GJ, we have Melister, and we have Jaded. And they have all played Arrakis, although none of them were playtesters on Arrakis, although they have playtested a number of our other Future Pastimes games and expansions, especially this Dune stuff. But this here, what we're looking at is the mod that was made by Krell in Tabletop Simulator, which is a great mod for Arrakis because it's got some nice little special effects that you don't get in the physical game, which we'll talk about a little bit as we get into it. But they have gotten to play it and have gotten pretty good at it in short order. So I want to kick off by I mentioned Borderlands, and technically Arrakis is a retheme of an original Future Pastimes game, Borderlands, which came out in I believe 1982, and it's an area control game. It's a resource management game. It's really one of the first games that combined those and really set that off. So it was way ahead of its time back in those days, and it has had many imitators. And there have been a lot of area control and resource management games that have come out since then that who knows if they've borrowed or outright stolen from Borderlands, but certainly the same kinds of inspirations. So it's actually kind of fitting for Arrakis to then build on all of the lessons learned and experiences of other games in the 4 decades since that game has come out. So there are quite a few differences between Borderlands and Arrakis. It has the same, I don't even want to call it combat system, but it has that same system for how you take control of an area from another player. But it also builds on that in a couple of different interesting ways. And one of the great things about all of the changes or modifications that we did to Arrakis is that they are very thematic to the Dune universe. And that was exciting. I know that when we first pitched this to Gale Force 9 as a possible retheme to Dune, I was a little bit skeptical myself because I was like, what resources are we talking about? Arrakis doesn't have a whole lot off of it, but there are some resources on there, and I think the original designers had good instincts for how to do that, and it came together pretty quickly. And as we were playtesting it, we were thinking of along the way new ways to make the game more interesting, even a little bit more fair with the water debt system, and it's really exciting. It's a really great game, and one of its perks, I think, is that there's really no hidden information. So it's not like you have a deck of cards and you're going to play a surprise laser gun or something like that. It's everything there on the table for you to see and calculate and figure out what's your best move and how can you take advantage of the situation. How can you marshal your forces to overcome your adversaries? And when you're playing with 3 and 4 players, you have more adversaries that you have to worry about, and they can team up against you. So it's a really exciting strategy game. But Bill, I'm going to start with you to just talk about some of the stuff that you remember from Borderlands and how that design evolved into what eventually became Arrakis.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say something make a statement as a designer based on some, um, is that the fact that Settlers was inspired with the way we opened Borderlands and with how that whole system worked, and then went on to create something quite different. But that's fantastic.
Yeah.
We all borrow. We always tried to be have every game be completely different, not only from everything else, but from what we had done previously. Um, and Borderlands is really dear to my heart. It's always been one of my favorites, and this game, what we created here, is is my favorite of all the games we've done. I love Dune. I love the what we call movie Dune, the quicker version. That's great. It's a wonderful game. There's a great two-player games in it too, where you can be two factions. Um, but this game to me is kind of a granddaddy that came together, and it is kind of, for me, one of our ultimate game designs. I suppose Cosmic is another, and Dune, and this stands with those as far as I'm concerned. Um, the the opening is very similar, with just how do you fit it to this ecology and the theme for this whole movie world, this whole book, the Frank Herbert universe. So we changed, that actually flowed pretty well. Um, those translations worked pretty well, and
Yeah.
it got a little more austere, which we felt like
Yeah.
it fit. We didn't have the rivers and the boats, but we had the worms. So there we go.
Yeah, we had the
Uh,
rock territories too, which is a pretty interesting departure
oh
from
yeah,
Borderlands. So Borderlands has that iconic map that's the map, um, and you're playing with those territories, and you have a similar setup of territories. But at the start of the game, you're going to be rolling a die. It's a six-sided die, but it goes from 3 to 8 in terms of the numbers on it, and that's how many rock barriers you're going to be adding to the board, and players are going to be taking turns placing them, and that's going to have a pretty big impact on how that game plays out. So it's interesting because Peter Alaka very succinctly and accurately described this setup element where you're not only setting up the rock barriers, but you're going to be setting out the production sites without knowing what they are. The players take turns placing them after they've got the rock barriers. Um, Even though this is set up, and that was actually the wrong basket, there's actually three production sites that are extra, and you shuffle them and you put one into the other bag of, so then you have 12. But even though you're setting this up, you're playing the game already. This is an important
yeah,
part. And after those sites, after all 12 of the sites come up, you're going to reveal what they are, and they're going to be one of four types of resource production. So spice sites, water sites, food, and worm teeth. Um, and then the players are going to take turns occupying the territories one at a time until they have filled up every occupiable territory, which is all of them except for drum sand. So that is the only space that nobody can ever occupy. Um, and then a lot of people are like, now we're going to start playing. But you have been playing. You've been playing this game, because where you end up with all of these your starting forces, you certainly don't want them to be spread out, because then they're just going to get picked off by everybody around them. You are trying to, you're trying to capture these production sites, but you're also trying to bolster them and protect them by controlling the territories around them. So you're making some tough choices right off the bat with how important it is for you to get as many production sites as the other players. And if they've been placed in a concentration geographically, that's going to be really tough to keep for the players who are out there. And somebody is going to be off in the corner of the map with maybe a lot of contiguous territories, but no resources. So it's tough choices like that you are making right from the get-go. And so the Arrakis version of this, not we like to say it spices things up when we're talking about Dune games, but it does, and that's one of the things I love about this. I mean, right at the beginning of what we call that first cycle of the game, where you're setting it all up, um, that that is a very tense part of the game, and at the end of that, you get a sense of, oh, this is going to be really tough. This is going to be a tough game for me, and it's going to be, but not insurmountable. Certainly, you have to, maybe if you're playing with 3 or 4 players, you got to convince the stronger players to really attack each other and try to come off as less of a threat. But let's
But
open it up to the newer players, because they did not benefit from from the years of Borderlands. I got to play Borderlands once back in the '80s. I never owned it. I have it now because Bill sent me a copy, but and I it was we were mostly doing a Cosmic Encounter, but it was the development of Arrakis that I got really immersed more in Borderlands. But and that's certainly been the case for you guys. But let me know your thoughts. We'll start it up. Let's start with Jaded, and we'll just go clockwise around. I don't see Mellister in here, but I know he's lurking. So yeah, Jaded, give me your initial impressions from your first time playing it to the last time, because you just did an invitational, and there's a nice video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. It's a playthrough, and it's a good one. There's a lot of tense action in that playthrough.
Very brutal. And I gotta say, the fact that the setup is player determined, I mean, initially playing it, it's like, oh, that doesn't really make sense. How are we able to choose where the rocks are and where the sites are? But once you actually see how it plays out, it's just, it makes board states that every one of them are almost memorable to me. Every single game I've played, it feels like, wow, this starting setup is like, I'm gonna remember this one forever because it's just so weird. And, beyond just if there was some way to randomize it, you know, always compare 10. The board in that game is always random, and it creates mechanically interesting starting positions. But I think in Arrakis, choosing where all the stuff goes, it creates almost like emotionally interesting starting positions. And I think that's what gives it a lot of its replayability in contrary to what you might think, where it's such a simple game with very little randomness and no hidden information at all. But the starting, the harsh phase
Yeah.
is almost one of the most fun parts of the game. It feels like you're already fighting someone when you keep putting warriors next to the guy, and it's just you're practically fighting in the setup phase. It's wild.
Yeah, GJ.
I have to agree. I originally didn't understand that phase. I could not see why I would ever put a rock in one specific place. Why would I place my tokens on one angle rather than the other? And then it clicked. I cannot explain why or what actually clicked, but then that single, I don't know, like 10 minutes of setup compared to, I don't know, a couple of hours of gameplay are probably the most fun for me as well. Because you can see a story start to develop. You can see someone push a little their border closer to you, or they inch, they try to scrape, they try to get closer to you, or you try to retreat or fight them straight ahead. And then maybe you end up being allies the next cycle. Who knows? The game we played in the invitation you're mentioning, we had a lot of sites that basically were forming a line down here and a couple of others scattered around the other angles. And immediately you could see the board being divided like in a diagonal almost. We saw Jaded and Platypus being divided in top left and me and Melster in the other one. And we just knew we were going to be like facing off each other sooner or later. It didn't happen, but in that moment, it was like, what do I want to do with my single troop that can actually hold off an entire army effectively? You don't want to place your guys randomly isolated in the middle of nowhere, but sometimes that's also kind of good, because then we will probably talk about the water deaths and whatnot.
Right.
But it's a game inside of a game, and it's some of the most unique setups I've ever played. And as Jaded said, every single game of Arrakis I will remember for how different and wild and odd just the board state was, even before we started the actual game.
Yeah, you
And rock
sometimes,
territories,
yeah,
these are great.
That's really
you
wonderful to
sometimes
hear.
you get
Thank
you know you get the players, they they decide cheekily, they're like, look at us, we're creating like the shield wall here, and they put a bunch of rocks in the in a line here, basically cutting off north from south. And what happens here is that there's really two main things about these rock barriers. One is of course the worms. They can't go through them. So if this worm wants to move to to Hollow Basin, um, they have to go through this gap right here into Dark Rock. Then they got to go around to get to it. They can't just go straight over. But the other thing is that the area control, the way that the battle system works, is you've got, your forces are in territories, and you're looking at which territory do you want to take. And the yellow tribe here is like, well, we want to take Hollow Basin so that we can get up to eventually take Hollow Erg and get this production site. But we need to have more strength bearing on this territory than the strength here. And right now, you've got one force here in White Rock is bearing one strength on Hollow Basin, but you need more than one. This strength here, down here in Drumwall, it doesn't bear because of the rock territory. They can't just take this territory. Whereas if this were here, they could just say, yeah, we take it. And that's it. There's no playing cards or rolling dice or, there's no wheels. It's just, do you have more strength? Yes, you got it. And that's all there is to it. So it's about looking at and seeing where you can do that. Now, this worm could move and bring it in that way, but let's say that this other rock territory was right there. You're like, you've totally blocked this off. There's just no way that any strength from Drumwall is gonna be useful on there. Maybe if you've gotten a Great Maker, which can move 5, so that could go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that could do it. But that's the thing. And sometimes you get this wall here, and then while people are placing the face down production sites, again, the players are like, oh, let's put all of them over here in the corner. And because they're doing it one at a time. So one person's like, I'm putting one here. And another's like, well, I'm going to put one here. But they don't know which of these territories they're going to end up with at the end of it. Because, again, you're taking turns placing them on there. So you may be able to get a few of these, but you might be like, oh, I got that one. But then you're surrounded by everybody else. And you're not going to be able to hold on to that for very long, if, at all. So yeah, the setup is crazy. Melister, do you have anything you want to add to all of this lunacy?
When I played the Invitational last time, it reminded me a lot about Go, the ancient board game where you surround your enemy whilst you yourself try to not get surrounded. and you have these weird concept like a monkey jump, right? Oh, I have lots of strength in this corner, but I can jump a territory, like I can, by leaving it empty, and nobody can go in there during setup at least, because if they do, that's a free kill. So you can try and
Yeah.
Get yourself a little core in a corner or in the center of the board, and then jump out of that corner, preparing yourself. But by the same token, other people can try and go in, force you to defend. And one thing to note, it's only one spot on the entire board where you can place 4 walls and then you split the board in half. Everywhere else, the board would have to work together to place all 5 walls somewhere to split it in half. So there's always, well, almost always, ways to get around these rock barriers.
Yeah, and there's some special events where one might get removed or actually moved to somewhere else. So yeah, we'll touch on that as well, because that is another fundamental difference between Borderlands and Arrakis. I'm going to get to the first one that we've mentioned a few times, and it's the water debt system. So again, it's very thematic. This is a concept that they have in Dune, and so when you take somebody's territory, so Yellow's down here in High Expanse, and again, you're going to imagine all of these territories have got somebody in it. So the only time you would have nobody in there is when somebody at the end of a cycle is like, I can't win and I'm going to disappear into the desert, which is a way for you to just resign and your forces go away, but you leave behind any of your developments and whatnot. So again, imagine there's all these territories are filled up with somebody. But in this example here, the Green Tribe, they want to take High Expanses. So they've got two here, and so they've got enough strength. So that one would go away. Green would put one down there. Of course, you would add a water resource because you are rendering the dead for their water. That's also something that we added to Arrakis. But then the Green Tribe has to give the Yellow Tribe a water ring here to indicate that they've incurred a water debt. And these water rings can be used later on. Primarily, you use them to get some resources. So if you've got 3 rival water debts, you can turn them in the development phase there to get 2 resources, any 2 resources. So we give an example here of water and food, but you could get 2 water or 2 spice or a spice and a worm tooth. And if you've got 5, you can turn those in for any 3 resources. And so that can be a little bit of a catch-up mechanism, because if you've got 3 water debts, that means that you've had your butt kicked 3 times by somebody, and you can turn those in for 2 resources. And you might say, oh, I was going to turn those in for 2 spice so that I can immediately build a crysknife in one of my territories. And a crysknife is a 3 strength item here. So if you've got a crysknife in this territory, now you've got 4 strength in this particular territory. So going from, I had the 1 strength there and then the guy got killed, to now I've got 4 strength in a different territory, that's a big deal. But another common thing is, let's say that I've incurred 2 water debts here. So Yellow has got 2 of Green's water debts because Green just keeps pounding on Yellow to take their territories. Well, at some point, they say, yeah, I'm going to try to take this next territory that you're in because I've got 4 strength bearing on it. Well, the Yellow player can say, well, I'm spending the 2 water debt here, and you can't take this territory. You cannot bear any strength on this territory for the rest of the cycle. And Green will get these debts back at the end of the cycle. And so they're temporary, but that can be a big deal. It stops their progress, and they may have been trying to take more than just that. Maybe they were trying to take my worm as well, because again here they've got 5 strength. They would take this and they would get my worm, which is a big deal there. So the water debts were, I think, a great addition. It really made the game more interesting and more tactical, because you have to think about how many water debts am I giving to the same player, because that could turn around and bite you in the buns later on. Or you're arming somebody. So, let's say that Yellow hasn't gotten any green water debts yet, but they've got a red one and a blue one. And if I take their territory, then they're going to have 3, which means they can turn those in and get 2 resources, which could cause trouble. So maybe I don't want to attack Yellow. Maybe I want to do something else. And so it adds another layer to the game that you have to consider. And it does help that player who has been a target to potentially change their fortunes and marshal those resources. Because if they're turning those in for any 2 resources, they can put that thing anywhere they want. And normally it's not that easy. If I want to build a crysknife in a specific territory, I've got to have the 2 resources, and I've got to get them to the territory where I want to build it. I can't just say, oh, great, I'm turning these in and I'm putting it wherever. That is not normally how you get to do it. So if you're like, I've got these here, this is the territory where I have to build that crysknife. And if it's in the middle, it's maybe not necessarily doing me any good. I may need it on the edge of the frontier where it can help stave off attacks from a rival who is encroaching on my borders. So this moving of the resources is a really critical part of the game, and it is one of the areas that can be affected by randomness. So Borderlands had this system where you rolled a six-sided die in certain phases, production, trade, and shipment, at the start of that phase, to see if the phase even happens. Because if you rolled, I think it was a 6, if you roll a 6, it doesn't happen. And we kind of upped the ante a little bit because, custom dice were maybe not so common back in 1982, but now they're all the rage. So I said, we can have a 12-sided die and we can change the odds a little bit. It's no longer 1 in 6 that there's going to be no phase. It's now 1 in 12. And so if you roll the storm, that means that so you can see the storm right there. It's the same storm icon from Gale Force 9's Classic Dune. We're like, why change it? That symbol works great. But yeah, so now, and then we also added a few other things that were not part of Borderlands that can change how things work in the production phase, specifically, like the worm symbol and the council symbol and the two moons. So, like I said, all of these changes were very thematic, and they added a lot of depth. So yeah, let's talk about water rings, and we can talk about the crazy Arrakis die as well. Let's start with you, Bill, and your thoughts on adding those changes to Arrakis from what Borderlands used to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I said, but this was Peter and Jack Kittredge and me, Bill, together. On one of the last games that we worked on, and we just got right into it, and adding the depth of the water rings. Just we understand we're steeped in Dune. we really understand it because we've all read it more than once and thought about it. So the water rings that seemed like a natural. You have and exactly, it added that whole strategic depth. I wanted to say something about the opening too. The opening, you really almost win or lose in how well you do the opening, where you're making your decisions about where to place your original troops, your original that's critical. Remind me, we don't call them troops. We call them.
I think it's just Fremen warriors. Yeah, you're just your initial.
They're groups of they're specific. They had, and it may be troops because they were military culture in terms of how they did their movement of groups of Fremen. So that opening is critical, and you have to win. You have to know that you can win territory that's important, or that forwards your goal, and protect territory that's important in the opening. You have to make sacrifices to be to create some security, and also to create opportunity. And sometimes that's impossible, but you do your best, and that opening is critical. And I love that about this game. So I've said something about both.
Yeah, let's. Yeah, go ahead, DJ.
Water deaths are odd. They are very easy to overlook. They look like nothing much. How bad can it be if I just take one territory and give a water dive to another player? Like one doesn't really do you anything. But then some other player thinks the same thing. Like they only have one of mine. I don't care. And now they have two. Someone else does it again, now they have three, and suddenly a siege is a lot easier to achieve for them, or whatever other tool they may need. But also, the interesting thing is that the Invitational especially ended because we kind of forgot about water deaths. We kind of forgot how strong saying, well, no, you cannot take this territory is.
Right.
We were in a situation in which we had to pressure Mellister from two sides at the same time, but neither of us actually could get to the end to reach the final siege that we needed, because we would have to give him way too many water depths to get there, and then he would just say, "Well, no, you cannot take the siege." And it adds such a layer of very interesting decision making that many other games don't have. Of like sometimes not attacking is the best choice. Waiting, just not giving them this extra resource and maybe doing something else somewhere else, waiting for them to spend the water debts to maybe prevent them being attacked by someone else is the better thing. But since the game is so tight, it's like the randomness is literally limited to the initial production sites that you end up knowing during the game and a few scavenge cards we will talk about later. Everything else is exactly what you see. So adding that extra layer of, do I really want to risk being screwed over by my own doing effectively?
Right.
Or do I just want to wait? It adds such an interesting decision that many games don't have, and I think Arrakis does splendidly. And probably more importantly, water deaths work really well as a combat mechanic in such a game that is so brutal, so clean and dry and right in your face. It doesn't hold you any hands, and water deaths are a really nice way of saying you got kicked a couple of times here, have something nice in return.
We when I said that this was an improvement on Borderlands, water debts would be my primary proof of that, example of that. We needed to um, do that balancing. That yes, you use force, but that comes with a cost, which can give strength to your enemy. And so we were able to add that truth to this game. That's one key way that this is an improvement on Borderlands. Water debts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really love this system of water debts. It it masquerades as a comeback mechanic, but I really think that any convincing victory includes what I like to call strategic losing, which is you lose a couple territories to get some water debts, and then if you get the three, that means it's really easy to surprise the table and get a second siege during the development phase. They say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, he's got all four resources here, so all right, get ready. He's gonna have a siege next turn. That'll put him at, I don't know, let's say two. And then all of a sudden you get attacked a bit, and now you have water debts. You cash him in. It's like, oh shoot, now he's building two in one turn. Now he's got the three he needs to win. A lot of my victories have been doing something like that, and then just being able to maintain the territory until the end of the turn, and then you just win it. It's it's really interesting, and it's almost sometimes better to be attacked than it is to attack. Inevitably, you're gonna have to fight people, but it's a matter of I want to get attacked at some point, and I want it to be valuable territory. Oftentimes in the Harsh, I'll stick warriors down in random corners of the board where I know it's going to be a real thorn in someone's side that they'll just have to come attack me eventually because they're all isolated off in the middle of nowhere. And last but not least, I really like the way thematically Water Debts really characterize the Fremen. Like, these aren't just random people surviving out in the desert. The Fremen are characteristically very honorable, and they're not just going to wipe you out just just mercilessly, right? They're always going to give you a chance to, I don't know, preserve their honor or what have you, but it really does make it feel like your tribe and not just tribes of people in the desert.
Yes, we Fremen pay our debts. We must cleanse the way between us.
And the
And
council is part of that too, if we get to talk about that.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, one thing I would like to mention: we have talked about the two big ways that people use water debt, but there are two other ways people can use water debt.
that's right.
One of them is by trading them away. So instead of saving up for three water rings to get two resources, maybe somebody will accept one for one. Where like, oh, that I see that person has six tooths somehow. He don't mind trading one tooth for one water depth of his neighbor. And the other way you can use a water debt is by passing through somebody's territory. You might
Right.
think, huh?
Yeah.
Passing through, yeah.
Passing
Movement is
through.
really important. And if
Yep.
because some territories you just can't reach, like Hollow Earth, for example, you can only reach it if you go through Hollow Basin. And let's say there's somebody decided to be smart and place like a rock barrier during the setup. Hollow Earth is completely safe from everybody, except if you have that one card that allows you to cross, in rock barriers.
Or a
So,
still suit.
person,
Yeah.
or still, so a water depth can be used to skip over a territory of that opponent. Meaning, if you have like 5 water depths, you can reach the other side of the map by just passing through his territory. And if that single territory there in the back end is completely undefended, and you have a really big force, you can strike the heart of the territory.
Yeah.
Which, can be nice.
So yeah, they're quite versatile. So there's a big cost to murdering their tribe and and rendering them to potable, drinkable water there. The other major thing that we added to Arrakis that is not part of Borderlands was the scavenge deck, and we wanted the action phase. You're getting 2 actions, so you can either scavenge or attack, and then after that you may attack or make a shipment, and you have to go in that order, which is important. And the scavenge is a really interesting way to maybe influence what you want to do for your second action, because you might not have a good attack. You're like, well, I just don't have enough strength to do a good attack. Maybe I don't want to attack the one that's out here in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to give blue another. They maybe have a bunch of these, and you're like, I don't want to give them another one. I'd rather attack, green up here on the other side. So you say, all right, let's scavenge. So scavenge deck has 20 cards in it. There's nothing bad in there. It's a matter of you might get something that's really good right away, or something that is like, well, this is not exactly what I need now, maybe later. But you're like, oh, look at this. I got a Frem kit, which is something I can hold on to until I try to use it. I might get a Mala pistol, which is a 2 strength or it's not a development, but it's an item that I can now use to help take territories. You might get just a regular old resource or some other special effect. So like I just got water. So you place this in any of your territories. And that can be a big deal too. If you're like, well, I've got this worm tooth over here. And now I get to place a water there, which means if these are both here in the next development phase, great, I can make a Chris knife. And that could be a big deal. So you take your chances. This is another random element, but it's not like, oh, this is totally broken. It's pretty straightforward. You might get really lucky with something that is like, all right, great, a worm. This is a very powerful thing to get in here, and then you get the token, but then this card goes back in there, so somebody else could get a worm as well. There's 2 Mala pistols, so somebody might get one, somebody might get the other one. Or you're like, all right, I got water, and I've got a ton of water for some reason. It's usually like I've got so many worm teeth, and that's the one that I drew was another worm tooth, which I don't need. I'm trying to unload these. But it can really change up how the rest of your turn goes. And it can foil everyone else's plans too, where they're like, oh, you were very weak right here. And yes, I was going to be able to come in there, but you're like, well, now I've got the Ornithopter, and I'm going to put that in there. So now I've got 2 strength in this territory. And what's more is if I do, this can move 7. So that's a game changer right there. We're like, great, I can go and maybe swoop in, maybe just deliver a bunch of resources to territories, and now I'm able to build a siege where before it was just going to take too long to marshal all those resources. So the scavenge deck can have a big impact on the game, and it was a nice way for us to add in some more Dune-related elements to the game, some real thematic things like an Ornithopter or Mala pistol. or the water of life. So we were excited when this occurred to us, and then some of our playtesters, like Ian Allen, had some suggestions for interesting things to spice it up even more. So yeah, I love the addition of that scavenge deck to the game.
Yep. Because one thing we haven't mentioned yet, but the tokens are unique, and the way the placement of tokens works in this game, you can't place the same token in the same territory. So if you have two Cliff Knights, they have to be in different territories.
Yes.
So getting that Mala pistol, which is like one of two, or getting that even just that one strength of the Ornithopter, can just mean you win an offensive. Because and then the next player can try and take it back. But if that player like scavenges for the Water of Life and just only gets a water which they cannot use that turn, it's like nope. It is the scavenge adds a really random, unique element to the game where you're never really safe because your enemy may just draw that chopper, they may just draw that Mala pistol, scavenge, and then attack you.
Yeah,
And
you're like,
two difference.
I've got 6 in this territory, and he only has 3, so that'll no big deal. But then, they had maybe they had a worm and they decided to upgrade it. Oops, I keep doing that. But in the real game, you flip the worm and it turns into a Great Maker, and you're like, I got that in there, and then yeah, I scavenged as my first action, and yeah, just like you said, now I've got the Ornithopter, and guess what? I now get to take this territory, and I don't even have to move anything in there. If it's 7 on 6, I just take it, and so now I've got this territory, and I just picked up a crysknife and a Mala pistol and water. So this is you're right. You're like, you can't just assume like, oh, I'm up ahead. You want to be like, I've got 20 strength in chipped rock here. Nobody's touching me, and then you can maybe rest easy. But then you're waiting to see if they're moving more of their strength to those borders, and you figure out like, yeah, if I can get 7 strength on the border, and then I happen to have something over here that can move into that territory, and now I'm bringing even more strength. And that's the trickiness. That's the stuff that you have to scan the board and look to see if people can do that, if they've got the ability to move their strength in. And this can move 5 territories, and it can bring stuff with it. So if you're like, I've got this worm over here, and I have a still suit in that territory, and I have a crysknife, and you're like, all right, well, this is 7 strength that can ride the worm up to 5 territories. It's got to go through your territories unless you're spending water debts to go through someone else's. But that's bringing this, I only had 4 strength on this border, but if I'm now bringing in 7 more strength into this territory, it will destroy, at the end of it, it'll destroy the extra crysknife because you can't have 2 in the same territory. But I just picked up a Mala pistol and I picked up this territory as well. And if I've just taken it, then there's another water that's in there. So that's what's really exciting about the game, is finding those opportunities to swoop in when nobody expected you to be able to threaten one of their territories. And the scavenge deck can really change your fortunes there. But just smart playing and being strategic about where you marshal your forces and how mobile you can be. And that's the real key, is you need to harness desert power in order to win at Arrakis.
Because one of the things you can, instead of scavenging, you can get to do another action, the action phase, which could be a movement.
Yeah.
And you really have to balance, like, should I just move my forces, or should I scavenge? Because it's a limited set. You can attack twice, you can scavenge and attack. You can move twice, but you can't, do 3 of those things. So you really want to be, look out. Like, should I just save my Mala pistol from chipped rock? I move it somewhere the enemy can't can't reach it, or am I going to risk it by scavenging and maybe getting another mana pistol? You know.
Well, and actually, you
There's
can't
only
even ship in that first action. It's either attack or it's scavenge. But if you had a shipment action in the previous phase, because you might say, you know what, let's just move these things over to here, so they're not in this territory, but their strength still bears on this territory, and that's an important consideration. Where you're like, if you're worried that somebody is going to be able to come into this territory here into Chipped Rock, you got to keep in mind that the stuff that borders it will count its strength too here. So this right now, this is only one strength here, but it's got 14 strength bearing on it because it's all blue tribe. So that is, you don't necessarily have to be on the edge of the border, but you want to be smart about where you put the stuff so that it's safe, but it's also contributing its strength to the surrounding areas. And you want to try to use the natural geography to your advantage, like drum sand. People can't typically go through drum sand at all. They can ornithopter over it, but that's one token out of the whole game that can do that. But they're like, all right, we got to use these rock walls. Maybe one's down here. So like, all right, this territory is pretty safe. It's got drum sand here. It's got drum wall with the rock barrier. So I maybe don't need to have as much of my strength in it. I can have move that down here. So if somebody tries to come in from the south or from the east here, I'm better situated. But that's the game. You're trying to figure out with a limited number of actions. And sometimes, like you rolled the storm, say in the shipment. So now I'm not going to get to move that stuff. I was maybe counting on moving some of my forces, getting these resources to where I needed them, and or trying to do both at the same time, which you can do. But yeah, sometimes you just, the storm got in the way. Can't always count on that to go your way. And maybe you were hoping to trade. You're like, I got this water here, so I want to trade. I'm going to trade with somebody else who has water just so that I can move the water somewhere else. And that maybe helps me build a siege. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting decision-making in Arrakis, which is what I like best in board gaming. What else? Got a little more time.
Well, speaking of scavenge cards and trading especially, a lot of these have this little text just above the effect. It says tradable, which means you can trade a scavenge card for another scavenge card of another player or one of their resources. And I think it's really easy to forget that it's actually a possibility you have and you can do. But it's really important and can be really impactful to give or take a card in one key moment. If this card, Shifting Sands, is the one effect we were mentioning earlier that can move rock barriers. And changing the geography mid-game is immensely powerful. And being able to either gain that ability from another player or giving it away with whatever other promise or resource or other card you may get in return is another decision that you may want to take. And considering trading is limited, you have in the trading phase one trade with each other player when it's your go. So you effectively can make 2 transactions. Making one of those such an important one, or deciding to give away your friend kit, which gives you immense flexibility just to get that one extra resource, is another decision that is easy to forget because I've personally not done it yet, but it's definitely something to consider and another layer that this game has, even though it's easy to just forget about it and dismiss it as not that impactful.
Yeah.
Since this game is so resource poor in a way, you have so few actions you can take. You really have to make the best out of them. Being able to shift the sands in literal or metaphorical way in one single action can really, really change the game in an instant.
And you have to weigh the impact. If I give you this, you have to decide, what am I going to do with that one resource that you give me? Because if that's going to let me to build a powerful weapon, or like, great, I can put a siege down here in this corner where nobody's going to ever be able to get to it. And you're like, was it really worth it? And that's the thing is, every decision point can be very impactful, and it can be game changing just depending on how it's done. Because maybe you don't even know. I don't even know how you plan to use this. Are you going to use it against me, or are you going to use it against somebody else? And you don't have to decide when you're going to use it until you do use it. So, it has some restrictions on when you can do it, but on your turn. But it may not be this cycle. It might be way down the line. It might be as a defensive thing where you're like, oh, you're coming at me. Well, you're planning to get me. I see what you're doing there, where you're putting all your resources and your developments there. So I'm just going to move this over here. So now you really can't get up to White Rock from Drumwall. You're gonna have to go around, and that might make things too difficult for you to do. So, or you're like, yeah, I'm going to attack you, so I'm opening this up. I'm going to put it over here, help protect, something else, or just make some trouble, slow somebody down. Yeah, a lot of these cards and elements can have a big impact. And the fact that you can trade them, I think, is interesting, because if you don't use it right away, you have leverage that you can wheel and deal.
And one thing to note is you can when you trade, you can ask the other player for one of their wardens, which means that if somebody's down in their luck, like they're like very far in the corner, or perhaps like completely scattered and messed up, you can always say like, how about I give you the sifting sands, right? And you just so you can like get back up or be an annoyance. And all I need is that one little pesky water that like it's only one of, it's not gonna bite you back in the ass later on.
That's right. Until it does.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the best parts about the scavenge deck, in my opinion, is it's another interesting way to inject a little bit of Dune lore and theme into the game,
Precisely.
where it might otherwise not be present. A Chris knife could just be a knife. A Maul pistol could just be a gun, and a still suit could be, I don't know, a suit of armor. But
Power armor.
it's tough to swap things in the scavenge deck around. It's like, is there really an analog for a Karama and other themes where it's like a literal miracle saves you? No, that's Dune.
I mean, the other thing that extended this game is the council, and to really make a different mechanic among the players. And we've done it in other games, but that felt special to me as we completed this game, to have that council work the way it does. There are a lot of different kinds of game situations that you can find yourself in, and we wanted the players to talk to each other about the situation and make decisions. And sometimes the decision is, Jack has the game.
Yeah, it really, the council,
And let's
so
just
it's
say it.
kind of open. So you've got, it's a chance for the players to look at the board state, and they can, you don't have to play the game out to the bitter end. If somebody is just in a completely unwinnable situation, they have the opportunity to disappear into the desert and resign. All the players can agree that, yeah, this player is, they're going to win. It's inevitable. I don't think we can get enough strength there. Too many things would have to go our way, and it seems unlikely. But it also allows for alliances, and
Right.
and the alliances. Now, if it's a 4-player game, and you say like, all right, let's this weak player is like, I got a chance, and I've got a couple of good resource production sites. Maybe I've got all the water, and so I'm able to produce the water, but that's all I can contribute. But the other player's like, well, that's the one resource I need. So I think if we are working together, we can pull off a win. But what's really interesting about the council phase is it lets you tweak the win conditions a little bit, and you can say, all right, I'll tell you what, I will let the 3 of you, do these alliances, but it's going to take one extra siege for your alliance to win the game, and it's going to take one fewer for me. So give me a fighting chance, I'll give you a fighting chance, and if everybody agrees, then those are the new win conditions. And so it's not crazy. And I know a lot of people were a little bit confused by the council phase when the game first came out, where they're like, can we just change the rules and say, all right, worms can fly and and production sites produce 10 spice. And that was not really the intent. I know that Bill would be like, do what you want. But, but again, as long as all the players agree, then, whatever. But really the intent was they're like, all right, we can adjust the winning conditions so that you make the game still fun to play. So if somebody is way behind, they're like, I'm not really having a good time, you have the power to adjust that. You can say, all right, we can adjust it where now all you need to do is build one siege, and we still need to build 3, and now you've got those water debts, so maybe you can turn it around, and you just have to survive one round and fend off the other players. And you're like, oh, now it's interesting. Now it's a challenge, but it's like I said, not insurmountable. It's a way to keep everybody engaged, and that. So I like that, because not a lot of games have that as a built-in system that you can.
And
that you
one
can do.
final thing, this is a good 2-player game.
Yeah, it's good 2 at 3 and at 4. So
and that we decided we'd make all of our designs play well with 2, and this is fun with 2 players. It's real chess-like, but it's this multi-dimensional resource acquisition and getting into the right place, and you create the board anew every time you start. So it's wonderful, multi-dimensional chess kind of.
I do know of one playthrough where the people, they just felt like this was a resource management and development game, and that was basically it. That it wasn't a brutal combat game, which is how we've always looked at it. We described it, it's on the box, as a brutal, cutthroat game.
Right.
And they were just like very non-confrontational. They're like, well, I'm not going to attack. I'm just going to scavenge, and then I'm going to ship, and I'm going to scavenge and ship as well. And they were never attacking each other. They were just trying to develop their resources and move them around and build their sieges peacefully. And it was a race. And I don't think any of us ever imagined anybody playing Arrakis that way. I can't attest to how satisfying a game it is when that is the only way that you play it, but it is theoretically possible to have a perfectly peaceful game of Arrakis. Let us know in the comments if that is how you play it and what you think of it. But for me, it is about the very tactical attacks, and the joy I get from rendering the dead into water cannot be understated. Or overstated either.
Well, it's also the acquisition of that key little territory that puts everything together.
And that's a nice thing. If you have a group of people that adhere against ties, you just have, say, the alliance rules, we cannot tie. We continue the game until somebody has one more siege than everybody else.
Yeah.
Make that rule.
And you can do that.
Yep.
That's what I love about the council. Was the council was saying to the players, you are the council.
Yeah.
I mean, you are Fremen. So think like a Fremen.
And the nice thing about the rules is it also includes a section for if you are that one person who just doesn't agree with the rest, and you have a really bad game. There is a mechanic where you can just leave.
All right, I'm out. There's an interesting team game approach to this at the back of the rules, and it's a permanent alliance is the one thing. But what's interesting about that is that you're a team during the Harj there, where you're setting up the board and where you're placing the rock territories and where you're placing the face down production sites and where you're placing your forces. And that has a really big impact on how things play out. And it's a really wildly different experience when you're starting the game in team mode. And I want to play it that way the next time that we do play it. So, Jaded, make that happen, and send out the invites for the Team Arrakis Invitational, because
Count on it.
it is. It's a good time. It's a really interesting, different take on it. And it sometimes makes for a much quicker game because you typically have the board is divided into quarters, more or less. And so is your team diagonal from you, or are they adjacent to you? Which that also very different, very different experience. If your ally is on the opposite corner of the board, they're not helping you out a whole lot because they're not really on either of your borders. Although it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't necessarily play out that way perfectly, because in the setup, people, they get a little bit sneaky by placing some forces where you're not expecting them to place them. And you get these pockets, these outlier pockets, where maybe they're like Jaded. They're like, I put that guy out there in high gap by himself because I want you to attack him, and I can get that water debt. And because that easy attack action, you're like, well, I'll get that water. That's great. I'll get the water for rendering him down. And but yeah, then I'm getting the water debt token there. But yeah,
Don't ask that poor soul that gets sent out there what they think about the strategy.
walk
Hey, get off the wrong bus.
to that erg and come back.
Yep.
Shahilud will decide. But if you do have an ally who is on your border, then you've got basically a double-sized territory where you each get to marshal your strength onto the edges so that you can press forward against the rival alliance. And yeah, that can be a much shorter game when you're not having to jockey around from every direction. But I like that. This is not a long game anyway, typically. I mean, it usually goes about 90 minutes. I think that last invitation was, 2 hours? Or how much discussion was there at the end?
With a little teach as well.
But it's a good length. It's a good game night game. So it's not absurdly long, and it is.
When will that be? Do you know?
What's that?
Do you have a date?
Oh, no, I think we're just talking out loud. Or I don't know. Is there a date?
It is going to happen.
It is going to happen. But
Great. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
yeah.
I wanted to mention one thing about the council that I know I've read plenty of people dismiss it, since it requires a unanimous vote to actually apply the change.
Yeah.
So you cannot just impose yourself on the entire table. And I see many people say, well, if the decision is not favorable for me, then why would I ever accept it? And it's easy to just stop yourself and stay in the position you are in, never change anything and just play the game as written, and that's perfectly fine. It's nothing wrong. But I think you would be missing out on a lot of experiences if you don't take that opportunity. Even if it's a risky move from either your or your opponent's side, to just say, well, now I only need 2 sieges, but you 3, you only need 5. Altogether, just work however you want, and it's now 1v3. It's risky. It's definitely not an easy decision anyone would make. But I feel it's a lot more interesting. It makes for such a more unique experience than the usual 1v1v1v1. So even if it's maybe not the most strategic, not the optimal choice you can make, I would suggest just take it and roll with it. Because it's so much fun to have a new puzzle in front of you, even with one simple yes vote. You don't need anything else other than just saying yes to see this game entirely different. Because now you're not fighting on 3 fronts, you are fighting maybe on only 1. And now you're working together with your ally, doing things, trading with each other, making sure that the resources go in the correct places. And it's such a wonderful change of pace in a game that can otherwise feel... I can imagine a little samey from one cycle to the other. You do pretty much the same thing. Just ship, attack, and scavenge or trade or whatever. But now the entire geography of the board changed, even though effectively nothing changed. And I think don't stop yourself just because it's not the perfect choice, take the fun one. It's a game after all. You should enjoy it and you should try the weird things because the game is already really different each playthrough from the setup. Just make the experience all the more unique, and worst case, you can just play another afterwards. The game is really not that long.
Yes, play the game, play it the weirding way. That
Yeah,
is
thank
our
you.
advice.
All these
Yeah,
Sure, to
comments.
use your weirding modules.
And if you're a guy that doesn't like talking, just say the Yellow Tribe vetoes all alliances.
Mhm. Yeah, we had that happen during the invitation, which was disappointing, but totally understandable. But
It,
I'm kind of curious to see how the team game mode works. I've not seen it in play yet. It does sound so different from the game I know and I'm used to. So I'm kind of looking forward to at least watching the video, if not playing in that game.
Yeah, I like it, and like I said, my favorite part is the setup. You get there are 4 spice territories, and they're like all right next to each other, and you're like, well, we didn't know that was going to happen, or you get one where they're all in different corners of the board. Those are the ones that the people tend to go after first when they're putting their forces down. Um, and then, of course, there are 2 different types. So you've got the full moon, and then you've got the quarter moon, and that happens, before you roll for production. And of course, whoever is the first player can set their thumper to one side or the other. Then everybody else in turn ordering can be like, well, if you're going to crescent, I might go to full, or like, well, I'm going to crescent because when you roll that storm die, if you roll just, oh, look at that, we rolled crescent. So only crescent spice productions are going to produce spice, and only the crescent thumpers are going to get an additional worm that they can put in any of their territories. Although we did put a little consolation prize, so if your thumper didn't have the right moon and you've got a worm, you can decide to upgrade it to a grape maker. But if your thumper did match, you got the option of either getting another worm or turning a regular sandworm into a grape maker, which has it's a little bit stronger and can go a little bit farther. And
oh yeah, as in the alliance game mode, that's even like a really big choice you have to make as an alliance. Like,
yeah,
do you as an alliance both have the same side up, or do you flip? Or do we match the enemy, or do we uh,
yeah,
do the other side? So we have the advantage if we have the full moon instead of the other alien. You know, in the beginning it doesn't matter because you always have the consolation prize, so you can upgrade a great worm to a great worm. But at some point, there are like you don't have little worms left. So
we had the game where on the very first roll we rolled the worm, which means that everybody loses a worm. It uh, it gets tuckered out and goes underground, and so now you've got the rest of that cycle. Nobody has worms. I think we rolled a storm on the second one, so nobody got anything. And so yeah, it was a brutal game where nobody
Right.
could move very far. So you're like, well, I'll attack this territory right here. And then somebody scavenged a worm, so they were the only one who had a worm for like another cycle. And but yeah, so just a wildly different game. That yeah, that's what I like about it is you're not really sure what type of environment the game is going to give you that you're playing in. So that's where it departs from chess quite a bit because typically in chess,
Right.
like, well, you know, uh, everybody gets a queen, and what? No,
Mhm.
everybody loses their queen just for now. Maybe you'll get it back later. Yeah, that sort of thing doesn't typically happen in most of your chess experiences. But yeah, if you are new and have not had a chance to try out Arrakis, um, this mod that Crow put up, it's in the workshop. Try it out, and yeah, if you want to get a demo, let us know in the Future Pastimes Discord. We can probably get one together and teach you how to play. and or watch some of these playthroughs. It's pretty easy to follow what's going on from there. The rules are not complicated. Probably the most complicated thing again is like a attack from a non-adjacent territory and how all the bearing works. But like I said, this mod really makes that much quicker to calculate the strength because you got the numbers there. Because normally you're like, all right, I got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 7 here, and you've got 4, 5, 6. You got 7 there as well, and so it's a little bit in real life. It takes a little bit longer to get that out. There was like a hot second where we're like, do we add all these random numbered tokens that you can just stick on the board? And we're like, no, that would be a terrible idea. So we did not opt to add more tokens with just numbers that go from 3 to 30 to stick down on the board, so you can go, all right, I know all the strengths for all theirs. Because part of the charm here is you have to do the calculation, and sometimes you're doing the calculation covertly, where you're like, all right, 5, 6, 7 here, you got 8, you got 9 there, because you don't want to be too obvious about where you're planning to go, so that you can swoop in, especially if you're waiting for a couple people to take their turns, and then you're like, all right, great, now I'm coming in. I'm coming in with all this strength on a worm that's moving 3 territories. Boom. But yeah, let us know in the comments. And if you have any questions about Arrakis, let us know there. I want to thank everybody for participating. And we'll definitely do some more battle language on a variety of other topics. And we'll get Bill in on some more of those as well.
Good.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That's it. And we'll see you again soon.